So in this video, I'm going to be trying to answer the age-old question, and by that I mean it's not that old. Is the iPad a computer? So this here is a 13-inch iPad Air. This is the M2 model. This is the one that just came out. Ultimately, I traded in my MacBook Pro to get this. I got it a lot for the MacBook Pro. It was more than what I could probably get selling it, or at least more than what I cared to try and sell it for. It would have taken a long time. But ultimately, I've been trying to use just an iPad as my main computer. You can see here, this is what it looks like. It's a giant tablet. It has been awesome to use, and I've honestly really liked iPadOS. However, I know a lot of people don't. So what's wrong with it, first of all, and what would I change about iPadOS to make it my perfect system? So for starters, this iPad is currently running iPadOS 17.5.1. That is the latest version of iPadOS as of recording this video, and it runs perfectly fine. I mean, it's an M2 processor. It better run fine. However, iPadOS 17 runs not only on this iPad here, but it runs on my old iPad. This is my iPad 10. Now, the iPad 10 is a brand new iPad. You can still buy these brand new. So this isn't anything spectacular, but the iPad 10 doesn't get nearly as many features. This iPad, for instance, has Stage Manager. This one does not, and it should, to be honest. The A14 chip, I'm sure, is capable of running it. So the iPad 10 is a really nice, honestly, a really nice, just smaller iPad that I can bring around and just use for whatever. I might sell this, I'm not sure just yet, but the iPad 10 is nice. And since you can also attach a keyboard case and a cover to this guy here would also be a really nice computer. And then finally, yes, I have a bunch of iPads here today. This is an iPad 6. These iPads run iPadOS 17 as well, so all these iPads are running the latest version of iPadOS. However, this iPad will not be getting iPadOS 18. 17 will be the last version that this iPad gets. However, this iPad is still perfectly capable as a computer, kind of. The iPad 6 does not have a keyboard cover attachment here. This is the only iPad that is still supported, and soon will not be, that does not have a keyboard cover besides the minis, obviously. So this iPad here, if you want to use a keyboard, you need to hook one up externally using Bluetooth or with a USB adapter through Lightning. However, this iPad is still a perfectly capable computer. These all can run the same apps, with the exception of this device only being able to run some of the non-pro apps, since this guy has the A10 chip. With these iPads here, what is the point that I'm trying to make? Well, it's the fact that iPadOS 17 runs on all these devices. However, that's where the iPad being a computer kinda can fall apart. So the iPadOS operating system has to optimize between multiple different chips and multiple different models, considering the fact that this iPad runs the same OS as this iPad, and this has the M2 chip. This has the A10 chip. iPadOS 18 is also going to support devices with the A10 chip, as the iPad 7 just has an extra gig of RAM, but it also has the A10 chip, just like this iPad does. iPadOS has to scale a lot, and unfortunately that means that devices like this lose out on some of the more pro features because they have to scale it across all these different devices. However, not all is lost. On the iPad Air, you get Stage Manager, and you get some other features like the Apple Pencil Hover feature, which this iPad does support. So this is not going to construe on camera probably, but you can see if it actually does. You can see these icons here hover, and it displays that. But that's not a pro feature. Being able to hover with the stylus is not a pro feature. Yeah, I think with the keyboard cover and such, with the Apple Pencil, this thing is a great computer. However, it's missing a lot of features that I think are necessary to be able to call this a proper computer, although I've still been using it as one. So the first one that I think iPadOS needs to have, and this is across all of these iPads, is proper root file system support. iPadOS does not let you do this, specifically because if you had access to this, you could probably go and change some things on the iPad that Apple wouldn't want you to do, such as changing the config file to add the Stage Manager control in the control center of this iPad to enable Stage Manager on a device that is not supported. Now, that is just a specific use case. I'm sure there are other things like being able to make modifications to the system to add some other things that Apple might not want you to use. especially because root access to the file system means that you can install any app, unsigned or not, and then you can just use it without Apple's permission. So it's very unfortunate that that's the case. Now, we have been making some strides to making iPadOS feel more like a computer. As of recording this video today, UTM came out for iPadOS, and it is in the App Store, and now you can run virtual machines on this iPad as you can on this iPad and as you can on this one, and even some of the other ones like the iPad Air 2. These devices now just became way more capable devices because now they have the proper app support that I would need out of a computer, such as being able to run virtual machines on an iPad of all things is now making me consider getting the actual keyboard case instead of just a regular bumper case, because I'm actually going to use the keyboard now. So ultimately, app support has helped this device along, but having root file system support to be able to manage my files a little bit better would be really nice. Number 2 on the things that I want iPadOS to have are app support. As I was just saying earlier, there are barely any pro apps for these iPads right now, and this is not an iPad Pro, but it does get the pro features because of the fact that this has the M2 chip. So what does that mean in terms of support? Well, apps that do support these devices are kind of hit and miss. Final Cut Pro, of course, is a subscription. Why? Logic Pro also is a subscription. DaVinci Resolve and LumaFusion do exist on this device, and it does work pretty well from what I've heard. However, it is by no means amazing on these things. People still suggest that you use a Mac for really professional things, and I can't have that. If I'm going to be using this device as a computer, I need this thing to support everything I need to do. This device can't be like a wishy-washy kind of thing. It needs to be able to run independently and do what I need it to do. Proper app support is a necessity for devices like this to use this as a computer. If this does not have the app support I need, I will not use this. macOS, for instance, has the app support I need. It has proper Final Cut Pro, proper Logic Pro, proper full-on UTM, and being able to run any app that you can from like GitHub or something, not from just the App Store. A computer needs to be able to do that, and it doesn't need to be locked into the App Store. Now, thankfully, the EU has been helping push this along. I'm hoping something in the US gets passed to also be able to sideload apps. However, right now, that hasn't happened, and I think it'll be a little while before it does. Number 3 on my list is Stage Manager. Now, Stage Manager, in my opinion, should be brought to every iPad, regardless of if it's a Pro 1 or if it has the M1 chip or whatever. These devices should have Stage Manager. Now, currently, when iPadOS 18 comes out, all of the iPad Pros will have Stage Manager, as the A12Z and X chips have Stage Manager, and that's cool. But devices like this need to have Stage Manager. Stage Manager is just a multitasking feature that allows you to move your windows around, similar how you would on a Mac. It's not the same thing, not at all, but it's a feature that would be nice to have. And ultimately, this iPad is very capable of running Stage Manager, considering the fact that you can already run a split screen and slide overview at the same time, giving you 3 apps. Even if Stage Manager was only limited to 3 apps on this instead of 4 like it is on this, that would be still really nice. Having Stage Manager with 3 apps would just make it so you can lay out your apps a little easier. Heck, Stage Manager could technically be on all of these. This device supports split view just fine. It does not support split view and slide over from what I can gather. However, it does support split view, which means that you could probably even just run Stage Manager with 2 apps. Now, at that point, you could probably argue its usefulness at that point, but it would still be a nice thing to have, and I ultimately think that this iPad could probably run 3 apps at once anyways, but that's beside the point. So yes, Stage Manager, in my opinion, needs to be brought to all iPads, regardless of their type, regardless of their generation, and regardless of their price point. Like, this device here is a $350 iPad, however, it still should be getting Stage Manager. There's no reason why this device can't run it. It's just a way to manage your windows. Number 4 of what I feel needs to be added to iPadOS in order to make this a full-on computer is proper audio device support. iPadOS 18 still does not have this, by the way, and it actually doesn't have support for a lot of things like external webcams and whatnot, unless you're hooking it up to an external monitor. And even then, I think only FaceTime uses it. It doesn't work well. It needs to be adjusted. So yes, Currently on iPadOS 17, I think 18 as well, you can only play one audio source at a time. There is no way to manage multiple audio sources, and yeah, iPadOS is just limiting in that regard. So that needs to be adjusted for sure. So hopefully iPadOS 19, or maybe even a later version of 18, adds some of this stuff to be able to give the iPad more capability. So ultimately, those are my main qualms with using iPadOS right now. But to answer the main question, is the iPad a computer yet? Even with all of those issues and even what I said earlier, I actually think so. So Apple has been wanting people to acknowledge this as a computer for a long time. Now in the past, people mainly saw this as a joke, and that's because it was.
What's a computer?
iPadOS back then, especially in the iPadOS 13 and 14 days, 13, 14, a lot of people like. It's really restrictive, and it is not something that I feel that you can properly use as a computer. I feel like iPadOS 15 was the first iPadOS release to actually add a bunch of features akin to a computer. iPadOS 15 gave us the modern home screen layout that we actually still have today and will continue to have, I bet, for a little while. But yeah, no, it added a lot of features that made iPad very more like a computer, and it actually, since it was brought across all iPads, means that even an iPad Air 2 gets very similar features to what an iPad like this gets. But yeah, since we've been able to customize our home screens now properly, and now that we have the app library, which is similar to Launchpad on macOS, it's been a lot nicer to use as a desktop operating system. And now that we have apps like UTM to be able to run virtual machines inside of an iPad means that now, if you need to run like Windows software, it won't run it very well, but if you need to run like Windows 7 or something like that on a virtual machine, you just can now, and that's awesome. So now we can just run full-on Windows software in a virtual machine on an iPad. This is starting to become an actual computer now. Like, this is huge. So now that Apple is finally taking the iPad a little bit more seriously, I feel a little bit more confident in calling this a computer. And honestly, I'm gonna try it. This is going to be my main laptop of sorts. I need to get a keyboard case for it just yet, so that'll be something I will pick up and probably buy in time. But yeah, this is a computer, and I'm willing to actually call it one. It has a lot of limitations, and it's not as good as a computer, and definitely other iPads like this need to get some improvements in order before I actually were to use it as a computer, such as not having Stage Manager, which I actually use very often on here because it's just a window manager at this point. I feel like at this point it's kind of just necessary, or else you just don't really have a proper computing experience. And yes, I know iPadOS likes doing things differently. It's always been like that. But we just need to have some regular experiences on the iPad in order for it to actually be a computer. And I think we're finally getting that. iPadOS 18 adds a bunch of features to the iPad that add a little bit more customization and makes things feel a little bit more computer-like. Ultimately, I think we have a long way to go, but I think that the iPad has a lot of potential. So, moving on to the hardware side of things, is the iPad ready to be computer hardware-wise? Well, yes, in a lot of instances, and no in some others. So the iPad right now, as it stands, has the M2 chip. At least this one does. The iPad Pros have the M4 one, so yeah, computationally wise, yes, this is ready to be a computer. It's got everything it needs. However, it still lacks in a lot of areas. Every iPad still only has one USB-C port. It does not have an audio out with an auxiliary jack. If you want to have a proper computer, you need that. I'm sorry. So Apple, you're gonna need to bring back the headphone jack. And I know you're probably like, oh, well, it's old technology and it shouldn't be it's not been on iPhone since the 7 or whatever. No, if you're gonna have an iPad geared toward pros, you're gonna need to have that headphone jack, especially because the headphone jack's not died. I think Apple has been trying to kill off the headphone jack. That's not happening. People still use headphones that have the headphone jack. My main set of headphones uses it, and not being able to charge my iPad and listen to audio with headphones that are wired, that's just a problem, and ultimately, it's something that will need to be fixed. Along with the fact that this only has one USB-C port, that doesn't help anything either. The iPad with only one USB-C port is very limiting. Even a second one, or like having two more up in the top here or something like that, would be huge. Being able to have that kind of connectivity would even help not having a headphone jack, because you can just use the USB-C to headphone jack adapter and still be able to charge your iPad. from the charging port or from another USB-C port. So in my opinion, this device, hardware-wise, is pretty close to ready to being a computer, but the hardware is just not there. And ultimately, I don't think that the iPad Air would be I do not think that the iPad Air would be an iPad that gets more than one USB-C port. I think that most likely that would be deemed for the pros. I don't know, we'll see. Apple's on their big obsession of making everything thin and light again with the iPad Pro, as it's extremely thin and in my opinion, really not good, but it is what it is. Ultimately, if you need to get an iPad like this, get the Air. Air has almost everything you'd need anyways. So is the iPad Pro a computer? Well, yes, it is in the literal sense, but this device will depend on what you need to do and if it will actually serve your needs. I think that if you need an iPad to write documents on and such, that's fine. If you need an iPad to do artwork, which I use my iPads for, then yeah, you'll need this. Macs can't do that actually. So for me, that's why I wanted an iPad, was because I can do typing and stuff like that, but I can also use this as like an actual tablet and I can draw on it, and the OS is optimized for touch. The iPad is a computer, but it has a long way to go before it can actually fully replace a Mac. I still will be getting a Mac laptop for those rare instances where I need to be able to run Mac software. Nowadays, I don't really use a Mac anymore. I mean, I use it for some things, but I've been just full on using an iPad, and it's been pretty great. The only times I really use a Mac are with Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, or anytime I just want to use a keyboard or mouse. Now the iPad can have that, so ultimately if I get the keyboard case for this, we'll have to see how well that actually works out and how much I would rather use it like that. Well, this video is long enough and I probably have been rambling away my thoughts too long, so I'm just gonna end the video here. If you like the video, give it a like and hit subscribe if you wanna see more content like this on this channel. I know it's been a very long time since I posted anything, and it's because I have work and I do other projects besides YouTube. If you wanna see what I'm up to, you can look in the video description. There'll be a link to my Blue Sky. I do artwork there, and I'll just post random things here and there as well. I'm not terribly active on it, but I hope to change that really soon. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all later. Bye guys.